into action. Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Real Estate Macro Podcast. Joining me today is my friend Chris Perkins. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Douglas. Thanks for having me.
Um, you bet, Chris. Chris has a very fascinating arc that I wanted to share with everyone. And it's not all unicorns, rainbows, and what is that children's cereal? Blue diamonds. What is it? The Lucky Charms or whatever. It's not been exactly Lucky
Lucky
Charms.
Charms. Yeah, Lucky
Yeah, and
Charms.
I hope to share some knowledge and wisdom Chris has had to unfortunately experience along the way. But Chris, if you could you share us? I believe you started with a restaurant in your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, so I originally was, kind of knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. I actually originally thought I was going to be in the cabinet making or, construction side of things when I was in school, in high school. And, I started liking money more than I liked going to school. And so at the end of high school, I was making like $4,000 a month while going to school. I was working 12 hours a day, just saving up cash, just squirreling cash away because I knew I wanted to own a business, but I
Yeah.
actually thought I was going to be in a cabinet making business, not the restaurant business.
Hmm.
So I kind of just gravitated towards the money, and I was the youngest kitchen manager of a Boston Pizza. It's a franchise in Canada.
Hmm.
And so I was 17 kitchen managing at a Boston Pizza, and it kind of sounds like a bit of a joke of a job, but I had 25 just kitchen staff to look
Yeah.
after, and we were turning over about $150,000 a week worth of food, and I was responsible for inventory management, all of this stuff at 17. So
Yeah, that's. I know it sounds like not really that serious, but when you think about the amount of responsibility relative to the age, that's an incredible sign. Just that you were really thriving in that environment.
yeah, and so I really got the experience of like managing by numbers there because you don't cook anything at this place, right? Like you are literally just assembling things.
Yeah.
But they just manage by numbers. I was responsible for scheduling, labor cost in the kitchen, and food costs.
Mm,
And it's a pretty heavy responsibility for a 17-year-old kid, and I was
yeah.
getting paid garbage like $15 an hour, I think, just because they kind of like that was good money to me. I mean, you got
Yeah.
to think this is 2001,
Yeah.
2002, right? So,
That's pretty good money for that era for sure.
yeah. And so actually, me and my mother went out for supper at this one restaurant, and they had really good food. Everything was made from scratch.
Mm.
And I'm from a small town, right? So, kind of everybody knows everybody is about 25,000 people. And the owner of this restaurant comes up to me and she's like, "Hey, I think you should come work for me. I know that you're managing the kitchen at Boston Pizza, and you need to come work for me." And I'm like, I'm getting headhunted for a kitchen. Like this is
What?
weird.
What?
And
Okay.
she's like, I'll pay you $15 an hour cash under the table. And I'm like, yeah, I could
Oh,
live with that. That's better. And then overtime on top of that, right?
right.
So if you work overtime, and so I worked both jobs instead of quitting one. I worked both.
Beast mode.
Yeah, beast mode. And so just squirreling away money, and this place was called the Long Branch, and so I learned how to cook there. I learned how to actually cook from scratch, like trim full muscle steaks,
Mm.
like cut steaks from the loin, kind of thing like that, and make soups from raw ingredients. So it was just kind of like marrying these two sides of things, right? Where it's like I learn how to manage by numbers, then learn how to cook, and then marry these skills together. And so, fast forward probably around a year and a half. Actually, something tragic happened. Maybe not tragic, that's a
Mm.
little extreme, but I burnt my back really
Oh,
bad at work. I had a third-degree burn from the bottom of my shoulder all the
oh
way
my
down to my
goodness.
lower back, and it was basically one
That's
massive blister.
that sounds traumatic.
Yeah, I spilt boiling water on my back. I'm
Oh,
talented.
oh wow.
Yeah, and so I was off work for 6 weeks
Mm.
and found this restaurant that was going bankrupt, but it was in a fantastic location, right on the highway. 75,000 cars a day drive by it, and I mean only in a town of 25,000 people, so it was basically the entire town 3 times a day drive by it.
And what province in Canada is this?
This is actually the restaurant that I was working at was in Alberta, but the
Uh-huh.
restaurant that I found for sale was in Saskatchewan in the same town. It's
Okay.
Canada's only border city. It's called Lloydminster,
Okay.
and it's hilarious because my dad lived on the Alberta side, I lived on the Saskatchewan side because it's
That's
cheap
right.
car insurance. That's a whole
That's
nother
right.
story.
Well,
Anyways,
actually, Kansas City is just like that too. Kansas City,
yep.
Missouri. Most of it's on the Kansas on the Missouri side, but the Kansas side has actually got some of the nicer neighborhoods. So it's really an interesting dichotomy like that for sure.
Yeah, and this is a similar situation just on a micro scale of
Yeah.
people, right?
Right.
So found this business and just got looking into it, and my talking to my dad with it about it, and of course I'm off work for 6 weeks and I can't handle, not doing stuff. I need to
It's
be
driving you
active.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, driving me absolutely nuts. And back then, like, I'm looking in the newspaper. I found this thing in a newspaper, right? Like,
Yeah.
it just takes me back, right? And
Yeah. Right.
so found this place, looked at it, got an appraisal, and at the time it was doing $400 a day in sales, which I don't know if you know much about the restaurant business, but it's a hard time keeping the lights on for $400 a day in sales because you got food costs, labor costs, all these things that have to come out of that, right? They
Hmm.
had 3 staff members in a 145-seat restaurant.
Wow.
So almost nobody, you could shoot a cannon through there at supper time and nobody would notice. And so we ended up getting a really good deal on it. We bought the restaurant, building, land, equipment, everything for 625,000.
Lock, stock, and barrel.
Everything. Yeah. So I spent all the money I had saved up on food, booze, and a down payment on the equipment. My dad actually let me use his apartment building as collateral for equity to, instead of putting cash down on the building and land, we
Hmm.
used his equity in his apartment building. So that we could put zero down. It ended up being cheaper to pay the mortgage on the property than it did to pay the lease.
That's interesting. So your dad was already investing in multifamily at the time and had a little bit going on in that space.
Yep. He had at that time four rental houses and an apartment
Hmm.
building.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a wild story. I'll summarize that in
Yeah.
about 2 minutes. I can summarize that. But this guy wanted to get into commercial real estate, and he needed to get these pieces of property off of his books. So he went to
Right.
my dad and said, "Hey, I will give you these things for $1 per property,
Whoa.
and you give me the rent until they're paid for." And
Right.
so my dad ended up paying $240,000 for a 7 suite walk up wooden apartment building, wood frame apartment building, and 4 houses. So 240,000 for all of it.
Yep. And I've got a friend of mine who's actually done a similar deal. It didn't work out as good in her case, but for sure the creative finance stuff is interesting when you get into commercial like that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so he's like, just give me the rent until it's paid for. If you run into problems or vacancies or whatever, just let me know. It's no problem. Just communicate with me, right? My
And,
dad's like, pretty good deal.
yeah, and Chris, it seems like having that creative finance thing going on in your ideas already kind of like creates a more like a broader mindset in your world, right? So you're like owning a restaurant's not a crazy idea when it gets down to
Yeah, exactly. And to me, it was a way to pay for the real estate as well,
it.
right? So I'm going to use this business as an entity, as a separate entity. So my accountant set me up properly from the get go, which was helpful. And I kind of already knew this was going to happen because of the way my dad had his businesses structured and his real estate structured.
Mhm.
So the restaurant business had its own entity, and then we had a partnership that owned the building and land, and we paid rent from the restaurant to the building and land company, right, to the real
Yeah,
estate company.
almost always the best way to do it. Absolutely.
Well, we knew right from the get-go that we were going to be separating these assets off, and we bought everything all at once, and then we'll separate the restaurant. But I wanted to show on the restaurant books that the restaurant can't afford to pay X amount of dollars in rent, right? And so we started the rent basically just equivalent to the mortgage payment so that we could keep our expenses low at the beginning, ramp
Hmm.
things up as we could, and then I'll raise the rent as I can over this
Right.
course of time, right?
Right.
So I didn't have any money left.
Yeah.
After that, I was flat broke. I had nothing left. I had a restaurant that wasn't even full of food. It wasn't even full of booze. We just got enough to get the doors open. I didn't
Mhm.
have money for a sign on the building. Nothing. So no marketing budget. Not even I hadn't even thought about a marketing budget. honestly.
Yep.
And, at that time, we didn't have social media to market like we do now, right? And so it was newspaper ads or a sign on the building, stuff like that. But it was all out of my price range. I couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
So we were getting down to the nitty gritty of like, okay, we're opening in 4 weeks here, and we didn't pass a health inspection.
Oh shoot.
And so the real estate agency that I bought this place off of actually hired cleaners for us
Hmm.
because they knew we were on a shoestring budget. I was 21 years old at this time. Actually, I was 20 years old at this time, just before I turned 21, just before the restaurant opened. But they hired a bunch of cleaners. It took us 96 man hours in 2 days to get that place cleaned.
Wow.
And I literally took a shovel into the kitchen and cleaned it out with a shovel.
Right.
It was really bad.
Wow.
Yeah, anyway, so we ordered in all this food and booze, and my dad's like, Chris, you still haven't answered my main question. How are you going to get people into that building? People are creatures of habit. They are not going there, clearly.
Hmm.
With $400 a day in sales, people are not going there. So I was like, Dad, I have a plan. He's like, tell me what the plan is. I'm like, well, I don't really know if it's going to work or not. So I'm not going to tell you what the plan is because I don't want you to tell me that it's not going to work. So I printed off all the menus and just got black and white copies of takeout menus basically. And I
Yeah.
went around to 200 different businesses in the city of prominent business owners that I knew from coming into the good fine dining restaurant that I was working at.
Hmm.
So I went around to these 200 businesses, like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. And I didn't even know that I'm pitching them. I didn't even
Yeah.
know that I'm pitching them. I'm just kind of like
Right.
saying, hey, this is where I was working. This is where I'm moving to. We should be open December 2nd. This is 2004 at this time.
Right.
December 2nd, 2004 is the day when we opened. So I didn't realize the power of what I was doing to the extent that it was going to work. I didn't, maybe they show up, maybe they don't, but it can't hurt to just go and give them a menu and say, hey, like if you guys are going out for supper, come try us out, and we'll see what happens from there. And if you like it, keep coming back, obviously. So we opened on a Wednesday just to friends and family and did kind of a soft launch. We didn't
Yeah.
tell anybody about it, but we
Yeah.
just everybody in the restaurant had been in the restaurant business for years. I took basically most of the staff from that other place came with me.
Hmm.
And so it was a bit of an interesting exit
Yeah.
that happened there. But that's a long story that I won't get
Yeah.
into. But so we opened on the Wednesday just to friends and family, and it was a disaster. Everybody knew what they needed to do, but nobody knew where anything was. So imagine just getting a coffee for someone. You don't know where the sugar is. You don't know where the creamer is.
Yeah.
And so it takes 5 minutes just to find those things. And then, so we slowly, that's why we did a soft launch for friends and family. And just everybody was eating on the house. And I'm like, oh, I'm going broke here. Everybody's just eating on the house because we needed to do that. I didn't want
Right.
to make real customers angry that are paying the bill, right? And
That's
if,
right.
people are eating for free and still complaining, then they can just get out.
Yeah.
So
No,
then
it's
we
actually a brilliant idea because it gives you an opportunity to find out before you really get your A game down. It gives you a chance to figure out what you're not seeing or seeing yet. So that's an incredible idea.
Yeah, and so we started with 8 staff members, and as I said, that they only had three. And the guy that I was taking over from, he's like, "You're nuts! You're gonna go broke. You don't need 8 staff in here. You're not gonna be busy enough." And so we opened on the Thursday to the general public, but we didn't really tell anybody that. We told them that we were opening on the Friday. So
Hmm.
nobody really knew that we were opening on Thursday. I just kind of started calling people that day and said, "Hey, come for supper if you want. We're able to open early, blah blah blah."
Right.
And we ended up doing $1,200 in sales on the Thursday.
Wow.
So that's 3 times. We raised the bar by 300% the first day we opened, right? And then the Friday that we opened, my mom wanted to be there for our first official day opening, of course, right? All sentimental like mothers are.
Hmm.
And she calls my dad and she's like, Ray, you have to come down here. And he's like, why? Like, I'm the bookkeeper.
Wow.
I'm not here to work at the restaurant kind of thing, right? And she's like,
Right.
well, there's a lineup out the door and your son is really busy in the kitchen cooking meat
That's
and
right.
he can't go out and take care of the people at the door. So you might want to come down here. and my mom was all chatting people up at the front door and stuff, but there was just too many,
Mm.
right? And so the restaurant was full, line up out the door. We ended up doing about $4,500 in sales that Friday
Whoa,
night.
that's crazy.
Yeah, and that, we just opened for the night. We didn't open for lunch at all,
Yeah,
right? It was just for the
just
night.
that night. Wow.
Yeah. And so we did $4,500 in sales that day. And I remember my dad was like, "Man, I was watching the baseball game. What's going on here?" He walks in the back door, right? And he's like, or some sports game. I can't even remember if it was a baseball game. But
Yeah.
he walks in the back door, and I have steaks all over. Like, we've got a 4 foot by about 3 foot charbroiler, and it's covered in steaks, and, kitchen staff's running around like crazy. And my dad walks in, and he's like, "What are you, effing nuts?" And I'm like, "Why? What's going?" He's like, "Why are you cooking all those steaks?" And I'm
I took
like,
an order.
"Because people ordered them and they're
That's
sitting
right.
in the restaurant waiting for them right now." And he's like,
Oh
"You're
man.
unreal."
And
And
because
so,
they're hungry.
yeah, because they're hungry. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what we're here for. And he's like, "You actually want to do this for the rest of your life? Like, this is nuts." And so it kind of like clicked for me a little bit because my dad had been, that was kind of like a turning point, even just the first day of the restaurant, right? Is like, do I actually want to do this for the rest of my life? Probably not. No.
Hmm.
But why do I have to do this forever? I don't have to do
Right.
this forever. It's a stepping stone, right?
That's right.
But my dad had been in the same business for, at that time, I think 18 years. And that was his goal, right? Like, own your own business, work it for 18, 20 years, whatever it takes, sell the business, retire, right? And I'm like, man, I don't want to do the same thing. I need some variety. I need to learn different things. I don't want to be stuck, ever. So yeah, the first day we did the $4,500 in sales. The next day on Saturday we did $6,500 in sales,
Whoa. So it even
and
went higher. Wow.
yeah, and then we kind of capped out. I mean, you only have 140 seats, so we kind of
Yeah.
capped out around $6,000 a day in sales. So the first month was December that we opened. We did $90,000 in sales in the first month
Phew.
with no sign on the building.
Hmm.
We're closed every Sunday. We didn't open on Sundays because burnout session kind of
Yeah,
deal. I
for
was the one
sure.
cooking every steak that went out of
Yep.
that building, right?
Yep.
And we had people the first probably 3-4 days that we were open, we had people waiting 2 hours for their meal.
Wow.
But we just keep feeding them
Yep.
drinks,
Yep.
right? Like, don't let the drinks stop, and we'll buy them if we have to. Like, if they're upset, we'll just buy the drinks.
That's right.
Just keep them here. But what's going to happen is when they get their food after 2 hours, they're either going to be a little drunk or a lot drunk,
Right.
and the food's going to even taste better,
Yes.
than rightfully so. But when the food goes out, it's going to be perfect. I
That's
will
right.
not send a meal out that isn't perfect, right? So quality over quantity kind of deal. And so we got faster and we got, better service over time. We didn't even have a sign on the building still at this point. But after the first month, we did all those sales. We were able to order a sign then. So we ordered the sign, but it still wasn't going to come in for 3 months.
Oh wow.
So we had our first 4 months, no signage. People just kind of knew,
Yeah.
right? They knew what it was called, and it was the old Venice House. Lots of people were calling it the old Venice House, is what it was called when I took over. But I named it Casey Steakhouse.
Hmm.
So just to kind of get steakhouse in the name, right,
Yeah.
and kind of tell people what we're all about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So then, about a month after we opened, we call the HVAC company because something's not right. The building's not heating up.
Hmm.
It's getting smoky in the kitchen, and we call the HVAC company like something's not right here, and they never showed up. So Monday we call them. That was on a Friday. We call them on Monday again, like, "Hey, you guys didn't show up. Like, we need you here. Something's not going right with the HVAC." And
Hmm.
they're like, "Oh, that HVAC unit is toast. Like, we've
Oh.
we've known that for years.
Oh.
We told John that." John was the old owner of the
Yeah.
building, and I'm still on a shoestring budget. I mean, $90,000 in sales. You still got a lot of expenses on that, right? I
Right.
mean, so I didn't actually have $90,000 in the bank,
Right.
and so it's like this unit is $25,000.
Easily. Right.
Yeah, and so I'm like, this is a nightmare.
Right.
Like, we need this thing like replaced ASAP. So we still owed. We did some vendor financing, and thank goodness we did.
Mm-hmm.
It was the only leg we had to stand on.
Mm.
So what we did was stop payment on our payments to the vendor on the vendor financing to get him to sue us.
Right.
So we could only subpoena Skyline, which is the HVAC company, to come and testify on our behalf if we were the ones being sued. If we were
Mm.
the aggressor and we were the ones suing the old owner
Yeah.
for the HVAC, then we can't subpoena Skyline.
Right.
We have no leg to stand on. So we stopped payment, got them to sue us, and essentially Skyline had no choice but to show up in court for us and say, we've been telling John for a year. And then we got him to check off all the equipment as if it was in good working order. And he
Right.
checked the box that this was in good
Oops.
working order. So we can very clearly say that he was lying about
Right.
this. And long story short, they adjusted the vendor financing to enable us to not have to pay full price. We had to pay, I think, 7 grand or something of the
Mm.
25 to
Mm.
replace the unit.
Right.
But that's the only leg we had to stand on. So I'm glad we
Yeah.
got vendor financing or whatever, seller
That
financing.
that made a huge difference in this case, didn't it?
Yep, massive difference. And so then later on, fast forward maybe 4 years, 3, 4 years, one of my servers ended up getting hepatitis A.
Oh wow.
We were, balls to the wall. Friday, Saturday nights doing $8,000 a day in sales. During the week was pretty consistently $6,000 a day in sales. And then the server gets hepatitis A, which, by the way, can happen to anyone. You
Mm-hmm.
can literally get it from pushing a shopping cart and then, touching your face. You can
Right.
get it. It's something, I can't remember the nuances of the condition, but basically it was on the national news that a server at my restaurant got this
Mm.
hepatitis A. So in the town that I was from, they were basically like, anybody that has eaten at this restaurant in the last 2 months should come for a shot,
Oh.
a vaccination. You know how many people showed up for a vaccination? Over 10,000 people.
Oh wow.
My sales went from $6,000 to $8,000 a day to $1,500 a day in 1 week.
Mm.
So more pain, right? Things are going great. three
Yeah.
years, and then done.
That's right.
And sales dropped off the cliff. And it did eventually recover, but I probably lost $300,000 on something in sales out of something that's
Something
totally out of my
random like
control.
that.
Yeah,
Completely random. Absolutely.
completely random, had nothing to do with the cleanliness in the kitchen, had nothing to do with the service, completely out of my control, and just sales fall off a cliff.
Hmm.
And then you have all these staff.
Yeah.
Do you keep the staff? Do you get rid of the staff? Right? If you get rid of the staff and then people are like, actually figure out, it's not that big of a deal. We'll go
It's
in
no big
there.
deal. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you get full and you don't have the staff. Now you can't give the service.
That's right.
So I kept the staff.
Yeah.
I kept the staff. I paid them through everything and, sent them home early when we could, so on and so forth. But, long story short, we made it through that. It was painful. It was a good 3 months of poor sales. And then it started to slowly recover after that. Kind of, swoop recovery, Nike swoop recovery.
How soon after this did you sell it?
Not long because, then it's going to look like a distressed sale,
Right.
right?
Right.
So actually what I did was bought another restaurant that just happened to be across the street from it.
Huh.
Same thing,
That's
same
interesting.
thing. Yeah, same thing was happening.
Hmm.
It was I wouldn't say it was going broke because they were very wealthy farmers that I bought this
Hmm.
restaurant off of.
Hmm.
So similar thing. They started selling the building and the land and the equipment and all that jazz all at once. And I was like, you know what? Having both of these properties right on highway commercial property, this is like a main thoroughfare in the town,
Hmm.
right on the Alberta Saskatchewan border. Let's get that other property as well. And didn't really want the business, but I was like, I'll take it,
Ah,
do what I can with it kind of thing.
right.
And in the end, I wanted to sell it. I didn't think it would happen as fast as it did, but bought this restaurant and land, took it over. They had like 38 staff when I took it over, and there was no need for that. I'd go there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and there'd be 12 staff on, and it's like, what are you guys doing? But this was
Right.
their management, because they're wealthy farmers. They're like, oh, they're getting customer complaints, put more staff on. This is completely not going to solve your problem. This is
Right.
actually going to make your problem worse, because then the staff are just going to talk to each other more.
That's
They're
right.
they're basically there to have fun,
That's right.
and they're getting paid whatever it was at the time, $10 an hour.
Mhm.
They're not there to make you money. They're
That's
just
right.
there to collect a paycheck. So if you don't have a cat managing the mice, you're going to pay the price.
That's well said.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we get the books for this place, and I'm like, it shows that it was breaking even, and I'm like, trimming some fat around the edges here, restaurant analogy, but
Yeah.
trimming some fat here, and tightening up food cost and labor cost, should be able to make 150 to 180 grand a year with this business, and then not including what I'm going to make on the lease,
Mhm.
renting the building off myself. So get into it, like crunch all the numbers, should work out all right. What I didn't know is that that was a false set of books.
Oh no.
That's what I did not know at the time. The actual books were showing a loss of around $200,000 a year.
Whoa.
So I didn't find this out for 6 months after I bought it, but after 3 months of slowly trimming things back, because you don't want it to be a shock to everybody, right? So you slowly trim things back and get things organized over 3 months, because we kind of figured we were going to lose money for the first 3 months anyways, and
Mhm.
then start being profitable after that, and just could not get it to be profitable. Like
You're
at
like,
this
what is
time,
going on?
yeah, this is a breakfast restaurant, right? So I would work. It was kind of like a complimentary on the hours thing,
Yeah.
but what's bad is that I'm working 18 hours a day minimum.
Easily.
And so I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to the breakfast restaurant, work there because I didn't want to pay staff to be there, just trying to trim as much fat. And then we can add staff if we get to a point where it's feasible, right?
Hmm.
So, work there till about 11:30 in the morning, get them all set up for lunch, and then I would go to the steakhouse for lunch, and then come back to the breakfast restaurant after lunch, after we got everything sorted at the steakhouse, because things happen quickly at the steakhouse. And then we go back to the breakfast restaurant and finish up the lunch rush there. I'd go home about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, try to sleep until 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, then get up, go back to the steakhouse, probably stop at the breakfast restaurant first, make sure they're all set. But I mean, they're not that busy for supper anyways. So go back to the steakhouse. And then I did this for 7 months straight.
Oh wow.
I got no more than 4 hours of consecutive sleep for 7 months straight. And
Wow.
then, my cell phone at the time was just on full blast all the time. So that
Hmm.
if I was napping in the afternoon or I slept in, staff would be calling me. I would basically like sleep with it under my pillow,
Yeah.
and I'd wake up to it. So I went home one day and I just like crashed on the couch in the afternoon. I never woke up for 5 days.
Oh my gosh.
I was basically in a coma for 5 days,
Wow.
and my roommate didn't know, because he would come home and he'd see me sleeping, and he's like, no
Yeah.
big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he would be going to work. He'd be going
Right.
out at night, whatever. So he wouldn't think that I was there the whole time. He'd just
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
I was sleeping, just happened to be sleeping when he came home.
Right.
And but little did he know, I had never woke up.
That's
And so 5 days later, I wake up and I'm just like, what is going on? Like 99 missed calls on my phone. I'm like,
that's
oh my
wild.
God, how long have I been out for? But it was just my body being like, you are done here.
Done here. Done.
Yeah, yeah, you're exhausted, and I'm calling her quits.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a big eye opener for me, right? Like, I am not Iron Man. I cannot do this anymore. And
Did they
so,
did they manage to get by okay when you were gone, and did they kind of recover
not
or handle it
really.
okay?
Not really.
Not
No,
really.
there was a lot of customer complaints,
Uh,
and they were calling me about all sorts of stuff. I had my voicemail box was full, and it was a rough week for everybody involved, I think. But
I'm
it
sure.
was just, what am I gonna do? And it was over. So kind of putting out fires, go back to work and put out the fires or whatever, and contact all the customers that had complaints and give them a gift card or whatever it took, right, to get them back in the door. I mean,
Right.
this is a theory in the restaurant. My theory in the restaurant business. I have a couple of them, but you feed someone 10 excellent meals and you screw up the 11th one, they'll forgive you and come back.
Yeah.
You screw up the first one out of one, they're not coming
Mm,
back.
probably not. Right.
But
Oh
you
my
develop
God.
that rapport of 10 meals or so, and then you screw up the 11th one. They're like, ah, it's no big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah.
Mistakes happen, right?
I think that's probably right.
Yeah. So, it didn't hurt us too much in the long run. Maybe that week it was a little hectic for the management to deal with without me.
Hmm.
Yeah, I went back to work, but in a different capacity. I took my franchise agreement because the breakfast restaurant that I bought was a franchise. I took my franchise agreement to the lawyer, and I'm like, you got to figure some way to get me out of this. I got to get out of this thing. And so I'm waiting on the lawyer or whatever, and just kind of trying to take it as easy as I could, like only working 12 to 14 hours a day instead of 18.
Right.
And, just kind of getting through with the breakfast restaurant, right? So, what I started to do was really look at the food cost of the
Hmm.
food that I was ordering in from the breakfast restaurant versus the food that I was ordering in from the one off. Like the steakhouse was just a one off restaurant. And
Hmm.
the franchise, they advertise, we have buying power of 50 stores or however many stores this particular franchise has.
Right.
And so we'll get you cheaper costs. Well, this is I don't know if you want to go into this, but they were making the franchisor was making about $350,000 a month
Hmm.
off of rebates they're getting from the food distributor
Right.
and that were supposed to be forwarded to the franchisees, but it never showed up. I
I
never
don't know
seen a
if you're
check for
familiar
it.
with Quiznos. Quiznos had a big problem with that, if I remember correctly, in the states with their Subway sandwich franchisees.
Yep.
So very, very iffy practices of the franchisor franchisee business. It can be great if you get the right franchisor,
Yep.
but it can be an absolute nightmare if you get the wrong one. So
And this was a nightmare.
nightmare.
So what I figured out was that I was actually getting better pricing at my one-off restaurant than I was at the franchise where I'm supposed to be getting buying power, the benefit of the buying power, right? So what I would do is then order in all the stuff that I could through the restaurant, through the private restaurant, and
Right.
then I'd put it in the back of my truck and drive it across the street.
That's right.
Yeah, and
That's
then
right.
so basically then the breakfast restaurant couldn't even afford to pay for the food, so I was subsidizing it with the profitable restaurant,
Hmm.
which hurts the numbers of the profitable restaurant.
Hmm.
And because of the bonus structure I had with my management, I had to kind of it's not fair to them to be
Right.
doing this, right? So I
Right.
have to crunch all the numbers of like how much food we sent to Humpty's,
Yeah.
sent to the breakfast restaurant, discount that so that I could still give the management their bonuses that they earned, right?
Hmm.
Because it's totally not fair to take away management bonuses when they're earning them, but it's my fault because I bought this restaurant
Right.
and two sets of books and all that jazz.
Absolutely.
So 6 weeks go by of this, and I called a lawyer, like, hey, how's it going? Like, you figure anything out? He's like, oh, honestly, I haven't even had a chance to look at it.
Oh, bro.
It's been 6 weeks. What are you doing? Like, I am dying over here. Every day that you don't look at this is costing me huge
Oh,
money.
good lord. Good lord.
So I'm like, you're fired. Give me my
Yes.
files back.
Right.
Got all my files from this lawyer, and I just like, I'm taking 2 days, and I am going through this franchisor agreement with a fine tooth comb. So I find this clause, I find a different lawyer, find this clause in the franchise agreement that says that I can terminate this franchise agreement with 30 days notice. What this does is forces the franchisor, they have two choices. They can take the restaurant over, pay me out for my equipment, essentially buy the business off of me, or they can say, nah, we don't want anything to do
We're
with the
good.
store, and I can turn it into my own breakfast restaurant if I
Right.
want. Like, I was going to call it the Broken Yolk.
Yeah.
So because Humpty's, right?
Yeah.
Humpty Dumpty, all that
Easy.
jazz.
Easy
Yeah,
peasy.
so it
That's
was like
great.
an easy transformation to the Broken Yolk, right? It just made sense to me, and everybody in town
Absolutely.
thought it was hilarious. So I had all of the signage done. I had all the branding done because I wanted to be prepared. If I tell them, hey, you're either buying this off of me, what I did was I defaulted on my rent
Hmm.
and kicked myself out. And then I gave notice to the franchisor and said, you have 30 days to either buy me out, make me an
There you go.
offer. Yep.
Yeah. There you go.
So I had the CEO of Humpty's at the time calling me a little bastard on the phone because
Huh?
he knew I owned the property and he
Right.
knew exactly what I was doing, and I was like, well,
Well,
who's the bastard?
yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Better than a bastard than a sob.
Yeah, pot and kettle and all that jazz,
That's
right?
right.
So he asked me if I would stay there because, that's pretty short notice for somebody to try to take over a restaurant. He's like, if we sign a 10-year lease agreement with you and give you appraised value for the equipment, will you stay there for an extra 3 months? We won't charge you any franchise fees or royalties. And I'm like, well, at that rate, I can probably make five to $7,000 a month if I'm not having to pay $10,000 a month in royalties, right?
Right.
So I'm like, yeah, sure, why not, right? And so they sign a 10-year lease agreement, buy the business off me, and wrote me a check for about 180,000, and
Nice.
I'm like, that was a pretty good deal.
That works out.
Yeah, let's do that again. So then put my private restaurant up for sale. It was up for sale for 2 years. So this is
Mhm.
about 5 years after the hepatitis A thing.
Right.
So, kind of people had forgotten about it by that time. And so 5 years later, we got to this point and sold the business, kept the real estate. And once the two businesses were gone, I sold
Mhm.
everything. I sold my house, I sold all my worldly possessions, and moved into a motorhome.
That's right.
Renovated my dad's apartment building, and we ended up getting rid of it. So that all worked out well. It was about a year it took us. We didn't pay anybody for anything. We did all the work ourselves,
Mhm.
renovated it from top to bottom, and people are doing this all the time now,
Yeah.
but back then it wasn't really a thing. We were doing fully furnished suites for workers that would come into town
Hmm.
and companies. So we would have agreements with companies to rent them off of so their temporary workers could have a place to live that was cheaper than a hotel and had all the amenities of a house.
Very nice. And how many units did you have in this apartment building?
Seven. There was only seven
Nice.
units. Yeah,
Hmm.
but we took the rents from $400 a month to $1,500 a month.
Winning.
Winning, yeah.
Yeah.
We put about 200,000 into renos, and some blood, sweat, and tears went
Yeah.
into it as well, of course, sweat equity, and we ended up selling that particular piece of property for 990,000. After my dad bought it for 240.
Yeah.
Sorry, 140. He bought it
Yeah.
for 140, but this is a 20-year time span too,
Right.
right?
Also,
Yeah.
for sure.
20-year time span, and then we put 200 grand into renos, so we actually put more into renos than he originally even paid for it, but is what it is. And so then took that money, bought some other pieces of land, and this is an oil town, right? So it's
Right.
heavily dependent on oil. 2014 comes along, oil price drops by 75%.
Right.
Everybody moves out of the town, and now I actually still have the piece of land that I bought
Oh wow.
because it's not worth what we paid for it even now.
Yeah.
And
Sitting
it's
there in the.
been 8 years.
Mm.
It's been 8 years and it still hasn't recovered. And people that tell me, "Oh, you can't lose money in real estate," hold my beer.
Uh, yeah. Actually, you can. You can.
Hmm.
It does happen. It is a thing.
Yeah, I
Well,
just
and
hate that.
thank you so much, and thank you so much. And one of the reasons why I'm excited to have you on here, Chris, is you've got textbook examples of what can go wrong and will go wrong in real estate. I get kind of annoyed when everybody's got this whole sales thing on and like, hey, retire easily, passively in your underwear via real estate. Well, it's generally not passive for everyone. There's a GP that's got to grind. The passives better be told the truth of the matter, and so there are things that can go wrong, and I just think it's important for people to realize the things that could go wrong, and they need to be like. I just feel like there's not enough. Okay, it sounds great, unicorns, rainbows, and wonderful, and la da da in the valley below in the meadow, but there are things that can go wrong, and this is a prime example. And unfortunately, Chris, I feel like you're about to share some other less than pleasant experiences.
Yes, I have some other less than pleasant experiences. So we have this land in Lloyd. I did well on a couple of pieces of land in Lloydminster there, and flipped them in 30, 90 days kind of thing, and everything worked out well there. And ended up moving out to British Columbia.
Mhm.
It's very mountainous,
Mhm.
scenic tourism spot.
Is that
Um,
Kelowna?
Kelowna,
Kelowna?
yep,
Yeah.
Kelowna, BC,
It is beautiful.
and
I do know of a developer that's working in that space. It's a
okay,
beautiful town. Yeah.
yeah, right on. So bought a house in West Kelowna, gonna renovate it and flip it. Easy
Yeah.
deal, like pretty basic. 60 to 90 days to flip this thing
That's right.
and get some contractors in there to do the work. I don't know what happens, but I was working with these real estate agents. They were working with the contractors. I put the money up. Let's just split the profits at the end after the contractors are paid. Obviously, all the expenses are paid. We split the profits. This is an easy deal. No, there's nothing complicated about this. 60 days go by. I'm like, hey, how's the progress going? What's happening in that house? Not a thing. Not a thing has happened. Sorry, what do you mean?
What?
Yeah.
That's right. What?
Well,
Excuse me?
the contractors had one of the wife had a nervous breakdown and the husband and wife were breaking up. And it was a
Okay.
husband and wife contractor team.
Mm.
Okay, who cares? Find somebody else. There's plenty of contractors around. Well, now they put a lien on the house because we didn't pay them because they didn't do any work. And they put a lien on the house for
Oh,
$4,000.
wow. Great.
And all we have is their tools, maybe
Right.
like $800 worth of tools that are used in there, right? Like, this is nothing. I don't care about this. Find some contractors, get the house done. We'll deal with the lien later. Okay. Found another contractor, got half of what we wanted done. The contractor then just kind of was way too slow, taking forever. We're
Mm-hmm.
paying him by the hour. I'm like, why are we paying this guy by the hour? A
Let it ride.
child could do this. This
Yeah.
needs to be done by the square foot or by the task. Whatever's happening here isn't right.
Right.
Totally mismanaged the whole project. So we're 7 months in now. It's not done. It's springtime. There's a saying in Kelowna, people's wallets open in the spring.
That's right.
This is when we wanted to have the house polished and ready to go for springtime at the very latest, right? And so the house isn't even close to done. So I just get in there and I just do it myself. So I'm like, I need to be paid for my time because this wasn't part of the plan. The deck is rotting off, and they weren't even going to fix the deck. They weren't even going to replace the deck. I just happened to have my best friend was in Kelowna working at the time, and he was a deck specialist as a
Wow.
framer. And he came, reinforced the deck. We redid the whole deck, put about an extra $20,000 into this house, more than we were planning to put into it. And ended up like making half decent money, but like there was no plan for me to do all this work.
Right.
And I ended up putting in about 200 hours of work into this house. And then we have to deal with the lien because you can't sell a house with a lien on it.
Mm.
So ended up having to pay these people. I think we settled at like $2,500 or something, but then $2,500 worth of lawyer fees,
Yeah.
whatever, right? Like, let's just get this thing sold, get it out of here. We ended up making very little money for the work that I put in. I mean, I just didn't even pay myself for the work because I had investors involved in the syndication in anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, let's make the return for the investors
Right.
because you can't replace relationships and you can't, it's very
Well,
difficult to.
and thank you for saying that, Chris. I think that's a underappreciated thing that has happened, and I've seen it happen time and time again. When you're when it comes to you versus your investors, you better bend over backwards to give them what they expected, if you expect to have any reputation left after this. And I admire you for doing that because I'm not sure that's a choice that everyone would make, but doggone it, you have to make that choice.
Yeah, you have to make it and you have to think long term.
Yes.
I do not want to rebuild relationships based on poorly managed previous relationships.
Right.
And so to back that up, like just 1 year, we bought I did a syndication of 6 townhouses, 6 units of townhouses in this complex in Lloydminster.
Yeah.
We got a deal on them from the contractor because they were the last 6 that he needed to get approved for financing to build the rest of the 90 units.
Right.
So we got a deal on from the contractor on them, and then we were going to sell them once they were built. They were pre-construction. We were going to sell them once they were built. During the time that they were being built, oil dropped, that like we talked about. So these units were not easily saleable then. We did get rid of them. We
Mm-hmm.
took across all 6 units, we took about a $20,000 loss,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't bad considering the circumstances that happened, right? And some
For
of the
sure.
investors in the syndication were like, let's just hold on to them and wait it out.
Right.
Well, 8 years later, we still would have had them and still not been. It would have got
Oh,
way worse before it got better. I'm like, no, we
right.
need to fire sale these things. Like, let's get rid of them.
Sure.
And so, because that was the first hit that I had to take, and I had about 180,000 of my own money in those deals, and I gathered about 180,000 from others, and I just made them whole, gave them a 15% annualized return on them. We didn't even have them for a whole year, but I gave them a 15% annualized return on them,
Right.
and I took the hit myself. And so that was the first hit I took. Then I took another hit on this fix and flip, and then I moved into another deal with these real estate agents
Hmm.
where the city of Kelowna made an infill bylaw where if your lot was a certain dimension, then you could subdivide that lot. And, some of the lots were big enough to subdivide into 4 lots, some of them were
Right.
only big enough to subdivide into two.
Right.
So this particular lot was only big enough to subdivide into 2 lots. So we couldn't get it legally subdivided until we had a house built to lockup stage.
Hmm.
So we submit an option to purchase the land, we pay a deposit on it, and then we build a house to lock up. Is
Hmm.
was and our plan was just to take a house from another property and move it, because the property that had this house on it needed to be converted into commercial land.
Hmm.
So we're going to take this house, move it here. Nothing really wrong with the house. Halfway through that, through nobody's fault, the city of Kelowna said, no more of that. We're not, you can't move an old house onto there. We bought this with a plan, and you changed the rules 3 months later. Like, now we've got to build a new house.
Right.
So everything changes. The whole business
Everything.
plan changes. The cost of everything goes up. Obviously, it's going to be a lot cheaper to move a piece of a house that was basically, we can't do anything else with it. So we're just basically getting a free house. All we got to do is pay for the cost of moving and the foundation. Like, drastically changes the business plan. Anyways, I had the money into this deal. The real estate agents, their company was on the option to purchase the land, and the guy wouldn't deal with anyone other than these real estate agents,
Mm.
is what the real estate agents told me. They had a deal with this guy, unbeknownst to me, to buy this backyard for $150,000. They come to me and said, we need $75,000 to put down on this. Once we get the house built to lock up, we will. And this is still when we were moving the old house on here.
Right.
So once we get the old house moved on there, foundation, everything, it'll be to lock up in 3 months
Hmm.
because we don't have to build a house. It's already locked up house, right?
Right.
So this is going to be 3 months, $75,000 once we get the house on there and kind of get an occupancy permit type deal. Not even an occupancy permit, but then we have to advance another 125,000. That's $200,000. But I didn't know that
Hmm.
their deal was for 150. The paperwork they showed me, it was for 200.
Hmm.
So this is taking remuneration without disclosure.
Right.
Completely illegal when you're a real estate agent.
Unethical, illegal, immoral, like everything wrong that could be wrong in real estate. This is one of the worst cases. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Not naming any name. Okay, I'm gonna I'm gonna drop a name that the initials are GC, and I'm gonna leave it at that for multifamily syndication. All right, back
Yeah.
as we were.
As we were. So what we did was in our agreement, they had to hold this land free of encumbrances, meaning no mortgage, no liens, and not borrow any money against the property, and hold it in their name. Instead of doing that, because the laws changed, the bylaws changed, and they had to build a new house, they found a general contractor. They didn't let me vet the general contractor. They kept us separated. The general contractor did not know about me. He didn't even know I existed.
Wow.
He didn't even know I was part of this deal. He thought this was their deal.
Mm.
So he's like, I'm not building a house on a piece of property I don't have something. I need some
Yep.
security here, right? Because he's putting out all this money.
Yep.
So he's like, I need some security here. And so they gave him the land for $1. kept a lien on it for the. So at this point, I've got $250,000 into this house with sewer permits,
Mm-hmm.
all the infrastructure that's needed before we put a foundation in. So the general contractor now owns this land, unbeknownst to me. I don't know this happened. I was traveling in South America when this happened.
Mm.
And this is, the digital nomad keyboard warrior here.
Right.
This is a cautionary tale. Boots on the ground are more valuable. You need someone that you trust with boots on the ground looking at these places.
It's like,
This
what
is,
is going on actually? What am I being told? Yes.
yep.
Yeah.
What am I being told versus what's actually happening?
No.
So then, general contractor builds a house. Fantastic. Everything's good there. I find out that they gave the land away to this contractor. And I'm like, what the hell do I
What?
do about
He
this?
did what?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He gave the land to the general contractor. Contractor builds the house. Once it's to lockup stage, they get the subdivision done. I paid for that.
Mm-hmm.
So they get the subdivision done. General contractor puts a mortgage on the property. He doesn't even know I exist. But now they've breached my agreement in two ways. They've breached it because they gave up control of the property. Now they've breached it because there's a mortgage encumbering the property and it was supposed to be held free and clear.
Mm.
So now the general contractor, rightfully so, this was the plan all along. Let's put the house up for sale and get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic idea. That was the plan. It's not a new idea. The real estate agents are like, no, I think we should rent it out. For what? This is not a rental house. This is a
For
buying.
sale. We're for sale here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
someone is going to buy this as a home. It's in a great area. It's right next to these landmark buildings where like Disney has headquarters in, not headquarters, but they have people animation studios there.
Right.
So it's within spitting distance of this massive commercial building. It's very, it's a desirable neighborhood to live in.
Right.
So, and this house, we priced it at like it got appraised at 690. So we would have had about $130,000 worth of profit to split three ways, which it's not great, but it's not like we knew things weren't going to be ideal because the plan all changed, right?
Absolutely.
So the general contractor's in control of this. He puts the house up for sale. Almost immediately, the real estate agents put on a pending litigation suit
Oh.
on the house. Now, nobody can buy the house, even if they want to buy the house, because of like these encumbrances. And no bank will touch it. No bank will loan a mortgage on a house with a pending litigation suit on it. So they're suing, the real estate agents sue the contractor for $250,000.
Man.
The worst part is, it's not even their money that they're suing the contractor for. It's my money. The contractor doesn't even know I exist still.
Still doesn't know you're in the picture.
Still
Wow.
doesn't even know I exist. And I don't know who he is. And I start talking to the real estate agents like, hey, I need this guy's contact information. And they're like, well, he doesn't really want to be.
He doesn't. He's an introverted contractor. He doesn't
Yeah,
talk
he
to
just
people.
he just wants to deal with us and doesn't want to deal with anyone else. And I'm like, I don't care what he wants. I don't care what you want.
He's our cousin Jeb. He's a deaf mute. He only deals with family members.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I'm like, I don't care what any of you want. I want his number.
Now.
I end up getting his number. By the way, in this time frame, 3 years have gone by,
Mm-hmm.
not 3 months. So time is money here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're getting less of a return over a longer time period here. So like, let's just get this deal done.
Yeah.
So I find out because I'm like, I'm going to hire a real estate agent to sell this thing. And it's not going to be these guys.
Absolutely
So,
not at this point.
yeah, I go out. The real estate agent does a title search and he's like, there's a pending litigation suit on this. Do you know anything about that? And I'm like, no.
What? Right.
What is happening? Now there's a mortgage and a pending litigation suit. So now they've breached my agreement in 3 ways.
Right.
Twice in the same way.
Right.
So I'm like, this is bad. This is really bad. So I hire a lawyer. Now I have no choice. Basically, what the lawyer tells me is like, you have no choice but to sue them. Because if if the contractor pays them out, you're never going to see your money.
That's right.
So you need to do this ASAP.
ASAP.
So,
Yeah. You gotta
yeah.
hop on it.
So I launch a suit against them, their company, them personally, like blanket the whole thing, right? So now nothing's going to sell. We got to go to court to get a court ordered sale. Now, what does that look like?
Right.
The only grace in this whole thing is while this is all happening, the Kelowna real estate market is going
Right.
like this,
Skyrocketed, didn't it?
skyrocketing.
Yep.
And me and the contractor, I finally get in touch with the contractor and I'm like, man, what is going on here? And we just break it all down. This is when I figure out that they bought this land for 150 grand and sold it to me for 200. And I'm livid. They've already made 50 grand off of me. They've already made 50 grand off of me, not told me about it. And they're trying to steal my 250 on top of that. They're basically trying to steal it. I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Right.
How on earth are you suing someone for money that isn't even yours? It never even came out of your bank account.
Yeah.
It was never even in your bank account. It went directly from my account to the account of, so I tried to cover all my bases here, right? I have wire receipts from my bank account into the guy that owned the land in the first place bank account.
And Chris, ultimately, how did this all get resolved in the end?
We ended up getting a court-ordered sale, and the property was ordered to be sold. It sold about 3 months later, and now the money's tied up in court, and I have a court statement that there's about $430,000 sitting there, some of which is the contractor's, some of which is mine. There should be about $70,000 worth of profit if there wasn't about $50,000 spent on legal bills.
Right.
And that's just my legal bills are $50,000 plus the contractor's legal bills plus the real estate agent's legal bills. Right. So nobody's going to end up with anything over what they've put into this property. Yeah. And the money's still sitting in court.
Right. So close, yet so far away.
Yeah, I can see it there. I can see it.
It's great.
Yeah, it's great. It's just a little piece of paper that says there's the money sitting in there.
Well, this is kind of, I don't mean to make light of this because this was excruciating, but there's a firm called J.G. Wentworth, which is a law firm settlement company. I'm like, can these guys pay you some money for your settlement and you're out?
Yeah, I mean,
seriously. Now, Chris, if we could unpack this a little bit, I would love to see if we can get granular on what were things that you could have, like lessons you learned from it that could have maybe, if you ever went in it again, and I get a sense you're kind of done with real estate after this, but we'll get to that in a minute. But I'd love to share the lessons of like, how would you avoid this situation in the future if you were in the same shoes again?
This sounds really like it wouldn't be a general practice. But if I was doing business, like deep business with real estate agents, I would get a background check. I wouldn't trust that they're actually real estate agents because what happens is, okay, now, dial this back a second. People are like, well, the BC Real Estate Board should be taking care of this. Nope. BC Real Estate Board already suspended their licenses.
Oh, geez.
For taking remuneration without disclosing it to the client. And that wasn't even me. That was someone else. Yeah. They do this on a serial basis. They've done this over and over and over. So now the BC Real Estate Board's like, not our problem. We took their licenses away. But they lied and said they still had licenses. And they didn't.
Ooh.
So background check would not have found this. No criminal record.
Right.
It's not a criminal record.
Any other litigation that popped up along the way that you're like, oh, they were already being sued over here that might have been findable?
One thing from 2004, which I found before, and they're like, oh, well, that deal went sideways and, blah, 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 made an excuse about it or whatever, right? And I was like, well, like investors get crazy sometimes.
It does happen. So again, it's like lawsuit's not a deal breaker, but you do want to know the deets and For sure, what you can do, and I don't know if folks realize this, you can generally eventually, you can one way or the other get a hold of the actual transcripts of the lawsuit, and if you can get depositions, get depositions if it's enough, if it's a big enough deal, and this is a big enough person to you, worth the effort. But you can literally get deposition stuff, and again, this is a deep diligence thing that on a small deal it may not be worth it, but if this is a substantial deal and you're writing on this relationship, that's a potential thing you could do to say, oh, wait a minute, they're telling me one thing, but this is not what the transcript is saying.
You said something very important there. If this is a small deal, it may not be worth it.
Right.
I think that's a very important thing to touch on because even if it is a small deal in the beginning, let's say it's only 50 grand or something, right? It can turn into a big deal.
Boy, you got a great point.
It can turn into a very big deal.
That's right.
And it's going to make the $1,000, $2,500 that you spend on that due diligence
That's
look
right.
like peanuts.
That's a good point.
So, this is sort of why I stay away from small deals.
Right.
Because small deals you tend to not take seriously.
That's right.
Big deals you take seriously and you do your due diligence. And you can only get nickeled and dimed so many times before it's all gone.
That's right.
Right?
And Chris, thank you so much for sharing with that. That is a very instructive, like brutal deal that you went through. I'd like to move on
Going
to
through.
going through. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Still hopefully on the tail end of that deal. Let's talk about happier days and what you're working on now. What Tell me more about the hedge fund space and how you got interested in doing that.
Yeah, so Hedge, I love transparency. I love when people are 100% transparent with me, and I never got that in real estate. Never,
Right.
never. There was always something hidden in almost every real estate deal that I did, and we almost just started underwriting the deals that there's going to be something that we don't know, and we don't know what we don't know yet,
Right.
right? And so how can we offer transparency? How can we offer scalability? I started looking into publicly traded stocks, public equities, things like that. And I struggled with public equities for a long time because, it's like, let's say that you're fantastic at picking a stock.
Yeah.
Stock goes up. That's great. I mean, what do I do with it now?
Right.
Right? I know I don't want to buy more because it's going to cost me more. And if I buy a stock and it goes down, yeah, sure, it can dollar cost average and buy more at the cheaper price. But then let's say that it goes up. That's the overall goal, is that you want the stock to go up, right?
Right.
Then it doesn't pay my bills at the end of the month.
That's
I
right.
don't have any cash flow from it, right? So how that doesn't make any sense for me, right? I want cash flow. I want residual income from rent or from some form of mortgage or payment, some sort of cash flow every month. I want it flowing back here, right? So real estate was the answer. And then I went to a course that Phil Town put on. Actually, went to a Tony Robbins seminar. So my girlfriend bought me tickets for my birthday to a Tony Robbins seminar.
Awesome.
At that 3-day Tony Robbins seminar, Phil Town spoke there. Are you familiar with
Okay.
Phil Town
I
and Rule?
don't know Phil. I'll definitely
Yeah.
check into him.
Yeah, Phil Town of Rule One Investing,
Okay.
and he kind of touched on options, on stock options, but
Hmm.
just enough to get me curious about it, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, my girlfriend's like, you should really go to that course. Like, you're already interested in public, in stocks and things like that. This
Right.
is right up your alley. Go to the course. It's a 3-day course. It costs $500. Like, I've spent $500 on way worse
Right.
things. And so I went to this 3-day course. I think it was 3 months later. Went to this 3-day course. It was in 2019. And Phil Town spoke there, and he had a whole bunch of coaches there that were volunteers and taught you about stock options. And I figured out at that course that we don't need the stock to go up just to make money. We don't need it to
That's
go
right.
up,
That's right.
right? And so I am like gung ho. I'm all into this, right? I get home and I start simulate paper trading and
Yeah.
doing credit spreads and doing iron condors and all this jazz, and I'm doing fantastic. Like I have discovered fire, And so I go through the process of getting my own margin account set up. In Canada, it takes a long time to get a corporate margin account set up. It took me like 4 months. And I'm like, man, every day that goes by, I'm just like missing out on real cash here. I keep
Right. Come
simulated
on,
trading.
guys.
I'm doing all this
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
I get a personal one set up because that's faster. I put 25 grand US into this personal account. I'm doing credit spreads. I'm making good money. I get this simulated trade, or sorry, this real money personal account
Mhm.
up from 25 to like $38,000 in a matter of 3 months.
Right.
And things are going just the cat's meow. And so then February, oh no, wait, middle of January, I got my corporate one set up like 3 months later. And so middle of January, I get the corporate one set up. I put $225,000 US in there, which is like, I don't know, 3 million Canadian. I'm just kidding.
These days, that might be about right.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
But
two,
no,
two, 2 billion in pesos or something
yeah,
like that.
exactly. So I put 225,000 US in there. I'm doing credit spreads and things are working out in fantastic fashion. I get the $225,000 account up to about 285,000 and I'm trading it. Everything's going fantastic. And then what happened? Oh yeah. I went to play hockey at noon hour.
Mm.
And during my hockey game, my account went from $285,000 in about 2 hours. I was down to $185,000.
Oh, geez.
And I was like, uh oh, what's happening to me? What
Right.
is happening to me?
Right.
This is not how things are supposed to work. And then I did some very quick research, figure out what's going on in the markets, figure out what's happening here. And okay, I think I should buy puts.
Mm.
Excellent. Let's
Mm.
do that.
Mhm.
So I buy puts. Market is crashing. This is, the COVID crash, right?
Right.
Market is crashing. I go from $185,000 in the account all the way up to 485. Like,
Whoa, just like
I
that.
am golden. Yeah, we're back in business here.
Yeah.
Businesses are shutting down, and I have figured out how to make money off of stocks crashing.
Right.
This is fantastic. I have gone from zero to hero to zero back to hero.
Right.
And then Trump steps up to the microphone and says, he didn't say it in these words, but now I know what he was saying. We are going to start printing money and we are not going to stop
Right.
until stocks hit all time highs.
Bigly.
Yes, bigly. And I am still heavy in puts,
Mm.
not even close to realizing the risk that I'm taking. Not even close. I'm thinking, I apply logic to a lot of things, right?
Mm.
I'm thinking logically, businesses are closing, things are going to hell.
Mhm.
There was a very famous investor on CNBC saying, and he manages billions of dollars, Bill Ackman.
Mhm.
The Hilton is going to zero. These are going to zero. This is going to zero. Market is crashing while he's saying this. I am making, like, I would make some orders. I go get a coffee. I come back and be up 120 grand on the order. I
Right.
like exit, exit. This is fantastic.
This
Things are
is
going
fun.
very
This
well.
is fun.
Yeah. What I didn't know is the next day, Bill Ackman went out and bought about $4 million or 4 million shares of the Hilton.
Mm. Mm.
That's what I didn't know until later. Until later.
Yeah.
So, figured all this out too late. And so, this is what I find out later. I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. Most traders do this. Um, Ray Dalio did this. Warren Buffett did this. All the greats have done this, where they start trading and they make a whole bunch of money and
Mhm.
then they lose it all, and then 99.9% quit.
Mhm.
They quit here. The people that can really do some serious soul searching and serious personal growth,
Mhm.
risk analysis, really dive deep, come out of that.
Right.
Ray Dalio borrowed $4,000 from his dad. He was so broke.
Oh, geez.
Warren Buffett was down 40% in 1 year because he was trying to guess what the stock market is going to do. So I my girlfriend's like, Chris, you just got to stop trading. Just walk away from the screen. Just
Yeah.
walk away. Just don't do anything. You can't lose more money if you just walk away. And I'm like, babe, I can't make any more money if I don't
If I
trade.
walk away,
If
right?
I walk away, I can't make any money. And she's like, yeah, but you're not making any money now.
That's right.
Like, you're bringing up very good points. And that didn't go well for her, by the way. That did not go well for her.
Yeah.
And, you know, my hat's off to her because she had a lot of strength during that time. It was a very stressful time for
I can
me,
imagine.
right?
I can imagine.
And so I did ended up listening to her. It took, you know, weeks for me to register that I didn't need to listen to her at that point. And I really just dove deep on my risk analysis. What am I willing to risk? What are the stats out there? Why are hedge funds going broke? I know I had this goal of like, I want to serve people and I want to be able to get them a good return. How can I do that in a less risky way and outperform the market, right? And so I don't know if you know this stat, but half of all hedge funds go broke. So I tell people, yeah, I'm working on starting a hedge fund. And they're like, as soon as I say hedge fund, they're like, ugh, that sounds risky. And I'm like, you don't even know what I'm doing.
That's right.
I could be investing in Apple stock for all you know.
That's
Like,
right.
that's not risky. What are you talking about? I know somebody that lost everything in the stock market. Everybody knows somebody that lost everything in the stock. Everybody I've ever talked to knows somebody that lost everything in the stock market. And what
Throw
did
a
they
rock.
do? What did they do?
Yeah.
Bought high, sold low. You talk to anyone, how do you make money? Buy low, sell high. What did you do? Bought high, sold low. So you know what to do, but you did the exact opposite of what you know works.
That's right.
So then I'll fast forward through a lot of this. 93% of hedge funds that make it fail to outperform the S&P 500. What does this mean to investors? This means that 93% of people out there are underperforming the S&P 500. They'd be better off to put their money into the
That's right.
SPY, the
SPY
S
for the win.
and P 500.
That's right.
They would have almost no fees and they would outperform 93% of professionals if they just put it in there and forgot about it.
That's right.
I've got to have a value proposition. I can't I can't even talk to somebody about investing with me if I'm not like, hey, this is where you could go. You'd be better off here, but actually I have an even better plan. And if you can understand my plan, you'll
Right.
very quite easily see how it's going to work better than the buy and hold situation, and it's going to generate cash flow. So there's another little ETF that has a history of outperforming the S&P 500 since its inception, and it's called the QQQ.
Mm-hmm.
It was brought in 1999,
Right.
and it's essentially the NASDAQ 100. It's the 100 of the largest non-financial stocks largest non-financial companies by market cap.
Mm-hmm.
It's heavily weighted in technology, about 51%. And I believe in technology. I believe that it is more scalable than the traditional business models that we're used to in the old days, 20 years ago kind of thing. They're far more scalable, right? I mean, McDonald's kind of proved this to us. Like, if you can get $1 for a hamburger from 5 million people a day, you're going to do okay,
Yeah.
right? So, you know, Apple's following this business plan. Google, I mean, tons of technology companies, right? It's like, oh, it's $1 for cloud storage. Like, oh, 100 million people have cloud storage. Well, that's pretty fantastic sales. So we want to invest in technology, but I don't want to buy a stock and hope that the price goes up. Because, again, the cash flow situation, right? So I designed a stock option strategy where we can essentially sell insurance against the stock, selling puts. So we just sell cash secured puts. Why do hedge funds go broke? Because they use too much margin.
Leverage.
Yep,
Right.
too much margin, too much leverage. Get rid of the leverage.
And Chris, I'm pretty sure you've read this one before, but I want to make sure and mention this one too. All-time favorite finance book, Long-Term Capital Management Story and When Genius Failed.
Okay.
This is a story of finance professionals, literally the guys that won the Nobel Prize for finance
Yeah.
and economics. 40-1 leverage, and these are supposed to be the geniuses. And guess what happens? 1997, blew up
Exposure.
a big hedge fund. Boom, and it's like, okay, if it can happen to those guys, leverage is very dangerous, and we'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So we eliminate leverage. We don't use
Right.
leverage. But we don't want our cash just sitting on the sidelines, hanging out, making 3% a year or whatever.
Yeah.
That's dismal. So we use it to sell puts. We use it as collateral to sell puts. So what this does is obligates us to buy the stock when it goes down. We're not just buying the dip. We just get paid to place orders, multiple orders to say, we'll buy the dip if it happens.
That's right.
And we're generating cash flow from our cash in the meantime. The compounding of this strategy over time is massive because the revenue that you get from selling puts can go towards purchasing shares over time.
And Chris, have you heard the term managed futures? I don't know a lot about it. Is this similar to a managed futures thing, or is that a
Not
term that you're super familiar with either?
not really.
Yeah.
Futures inherently use a lot of leverage.
Okay.
And so I want to be on the equities side and own shares of companies. So people look at the markets like it's just this thing that just bounces around up and down all day long. And I always tell people this too is like, what's the best part about the stock market? It's liquid.
Yeah.
What's the worst part about the stock market?
It's liquid.
It's liquid, right? So controlling your emotions is like even Warren Buffett says, like, you do not have to be smart to do what I'm doing. You don't have to be a brain surgeon. You don't have to be a finance major. You don't have to know any of that stuff. If you have control of your emotions, you can very easily do this.
Temperament. Yeah.
But most people do not have control of their emotions.
I would agree.
And I actually use, so rule number one of investing,
don't lose money.
Don't lose money. It sounds very simple, right? But what I did with my trade strategy was look at how can I place trades that I can actually follow rule number one. And just to say a nuance on it is don't realize a loss.
Right.
So you've heard tons of traders say, oh, I have stop losses here, or I cut my losses here. Like, we do not do that.
We don't
ever.
We don't even play that game.
We don't play that game. Right. We do not cut our losses ever because we know that over the long term, buying the dip makes sense. I don't know what's going to happen with the stock market next week. I don't know what's going to happen with it next week. If it was possible to predict the market, and, you know, there's lots of hedge fund managers out there that would argue, oh, you can read the charts, you can do all this stuff. If the stock market was predictable, do you not think that BlackRock would always go up? Do you not think that Berkshire Hathaway would always go up? Do you not think that ARK, you know, Cathie Wood's ETF, would always go up? All of these things would always go up.
Hey, Chris, you don't have to say to the moon.
Yeah. These funds have the resources, if it was possible, to predict what will happen in the market. If it was doable. But then you have Joe trading in his basement reading charts. And so I have this analogy that some people get a kick out of when people talk about reading charts. I'm like, so imagine you're in your car and you're looking in your rearview mirrors and you have a blanket over your windshield and you are driving forward trying to figure out where the road goes. How well do you think that's going to go? Not very well. Like, there's support and there's resistance and you can argue all these things. And it's always there until it's not. Mm-hmm. Like, when the market crashes, there's just no support. But it doesn't go to zero, does it?
It doesn't, no.
It doesn't ever go to zero. And so this is the other thing is like, let's trade a diversified asset that can't go to zero because the QQQ will automatically rebalance itself. Mm-hmm. It's designed not to go to zero. Any single stock has some inherent danger, single company has some inherent danger of going to zero. Yeah. Google, fairly unlikely.
Right.
PayPal, probably more likely. It could. I'm not saying it will, but there's different likelihoods of those things. Right?
But the likelihood of QQQ going to zero is like, let's put it this way. We're living in a post-nuclear apocalypse if it goes to zero.
Exactly. Absolutely. And our concerns are not going to be money. It's going to be food, shelter, guns.
Right. Yeah. Right. And zombies, or if we're fighting off zombies, maybe.
Yeah. Hunting and gathering. Yeah.
That's right.
We're back to hunting and gathering.
That's right.
So trade an asset that I don't want to say can't, but has a highly unlikely possibility of going to zero. And if it does, we have plenty of other things to worry about other than money.
That's right.
And we're of course going to have all these outlier years all the time. You know, when markets are really down, they tend to recover in spectacular fashion. They tend to. Sometimes it takes years. But I don't want to have to care what the stock market does tomorrow, the next hour, next week. I don't want to have to care about that. I want to just trade and follow rule number one.
Right.
And, you know, we generate cash flow by selling puts once we get assigned shares. So we never buy shares until they go down.
Right.
We only buy shares when we get assigned on our puts. And so then we want to be a part of the market. Once we bought the dip, we don't want to just like sell them right away, right? We want to keep the shares, hold the asset. But I also want to make some money off the asset, just like you buy real estate, right? So I do these real estate analogies because I come from real estate and I talk to people about real estate all the time. It's like, imagine if you could get paid just to put an offer in on a house that expires next week.
That's right.
That's what you're doing in the stock market.
That's right.
And so what would you do if let's say this piece of real estate's for sale for $1 million and you only want to pay $950 for it. You could get paid just to say, I'll give you $950 for it. The offer is good till next week. And you can get paid, let's say, $5,000 to say that.
That's right.
Sounds like a pretty good deal, doesn't it?
It absolutely is cool.
But if the price falls to $920, you still have to pay $950.
That's right.
But you're already willing to pay $950 for it, so what's the problem?
What's the problem?
But people will freak out and sell the property. And it's like, okay, now you own the property at $950 and someone offers you $920 for it. You gonna sell it? Everybody's like, no, why would I sell it? I just paid $950 for it and I invest for the long term. So why would you do that in the stock market? It's the same thing. You got to look at it as an asset. And then Warren Buffett preaches this. He's like, look at it as if you're buying the whole company.
Yes.
And, you know, with the QQQ, you're buying 104 companies. Right now, there's 104 companies in there. So you're buying
104 tech companies.
Well, not all of them are tech, but most of them.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just assuming then, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, only about 50% of them are tech.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess I misunderstood.
Yeah, there's some consumer discretionary, there's some healthcare, there's some...
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
well, I think actually in a way that's maybe even better then because you're getting more broad-based.
Diversification, yeah.
Right.
So this is what I like to say is like it's diversification within one asset.
Mm-hmm.
And we get paid to place orders to buy, and so our formula is to stay about 50% invested in the stock because we want to be in the game, and about 50% in cash because we want to be able to buy the dip if it comes.
Right.
And so now what we've got is we've got the ability to sell covered calls because we're only going to sell covered calls if we can sell our asset for more than we paid for it. So we've always got some profit factored in there, and we're only going to buy more of the asset if it falls. Right. But we're going to get paid to simultaneously say we'll sell if it goes up and we'll buy if it goes down. And if it goes up, we'll cash in on the put side, profits. If it goes down, we'll cash in on the call side, profits. And if it doesn't move enough either way, we cash in on both sides just by time elapsing. Right. And we only... So my fund is called Abundance Asset Management. Mm-hmm. And we manage it with an abundant mindset where, you know, I have this belief that you get what you focus on. And many people have this belief.
A great trader of mine, friend of mine this weekend mentioned a book, and I can't remember who he was quoting, but you get what you want. Yeah. In trading, and it's really weird. It's back to that you're creating your reality, and most people don't realize that we're a reality generating machine. There's a lot of reality that's given, but for the most part, we're also generating reality also simultaneously. It's a real man, that's a whole long
manifesting
podcast.
Yeah,
manifesting. But you do in a lot of ways get what you're wanting out of the deal. So I couldn't agree more. I think with that mindset, that's a huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and then so we just focus on the profit. So part of our rules is we can only close a trade if there's a substantial amount of profit. And, that varies depending on what our trade timeline is. We have spreadsheets and all sorts of calculators to figure this out.
Right. I
can do a lot of it in my head as I go kind of thing because I've been doing it for so long. But, it's that abundant mindset of like, can trade for short-term cash flow and simultaneously invest for the long haul.
Hmm.
I can do both of those things. I don't have to have my cake and not eat it,
Right.
right? I always think like, what's the point of having cake if you can't eat it? So
But
what
is
our
it keto though? If it's
yeah,
not keto,
exactly.
I'm out. I'm
Yeah,
out.
one of
But
our
anyway, no, no.
yeah.
This
So
is fascinating,
our
Chris.
fund wants
No,
our
go ahead.
fund our fund has a 1 year lockup period so that we can compound gains. And then after the 1 year lockup period, we want to start offering cash flow every quarter.
Hmm.
So people will not need the stock to go up. We can generate an 18% return even if the stock just kind of bounces around and doesn't really perform, which actually a lot of people think is going to happen for the next year or two. And we can even make a positive return if the stock slides by 10% in a year.
Hmm.
So, not needing the stock to go up to generate cash flow was really the key to my transition to public equities and just discovering that I can manage it in a risk adverse way, offer cash flow, and manage it from my laptop and offer transparency
Hmm.
to people. So when people invest with us, they have unparalleled transparency. They can see all of our positions. I will do the trading live in real time. So anytime they want, they can log into our
They
office
can
hours.
literally watch you trading.
Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's awesome.
So accountability, transparency, and this is, people, real estate people hate it when I say this, but I feel like I can on this show. So REITs have a history of outperforming the private sector.
Mm.
And with a REIT, you can sell put options and you can sell call options. So you can
I'm gonna
manage.
I can't have this on the show. I'm gonna edit this out.
Yeah, you got to edit
No,
this
no,
out.
no, no. I'm all for, again, there are a ton of different options, different strategies work for different people, and
Yeah.
that's what makes me actually a little crazy is when people are just talking their book and they're just not giving the whole picture. And my belief is abundance.
Yep.
I am not for everyone. We do not do everything for everyone. That's a silly strategy to begin with. We
Yep.
want you to know your options. In fact, I believe in Jay Abraham talked about the strategy of preeminence. I love my customers so much that I'm going to tell them the entire truth of the matter. They're going to know, okay, if I have this problem, I'll help you, and if I can't help you, I'll point you in the direction that show that it with no benefit to me, because you know what, I have to love my customers that much, and it's ultimately a fiduciary duty. Now, I know fiduciary is kind of a dirty word. I know Wall Street really hates the word,
Yep.
but fiduciary duty in its ultimate form is you're literally like my grandmother, and I'm taking care of you. I'm helping you take care of your finances, grandma.
Yep. Yep.
And I don't know about you, but my grandmother was probably the most important person to me ever. And
Yep.
so I'm gonna give the love that I would give to my grandmother to your finances.
Yep. And real estate people tend to shy away from the fact that people would technically, on average, I mean, of course, there's outliers here, right? There's always outliers. So I'm not talking about the outliers. In general, if you want to invest in real estate, you would be better off investing in a publicly traded REIT than you
Right.
would be to invest in the private sector. And so, if, back to my thesis, if the QQQ
Now,
continues to,
now, question on that. Real quick, I got to ask this question though, just in the balance of getting everything here. After tax or pre-tax basis?
with my partner Dylan Clark, we have the ability to offer our limited partners the
Right.
ability to invest pre-tax income and not pay tax on their distributions if they allow us to structure it the way it needs to be structured for such results.
It is a different game for sure.
Yeah.
And Dylan and I have had this discussion. We're going deep into the weeds on when it's right for other people, and it's definitely worth the discussion because the the benefits are different. It's a different world. It's a different way of thinking, and it's just different thinking. So
Yeah.
it's not again, everything's not for everyone.
Yeah.
If you don't like what Dylan's talking about, you don't have to do it, for goodness sake.
But at
But
least you know it's there.
there's
Yeah.
some options to you, and again, we want you to know the options, and you make a choice for you.
Yeah. Make the best choice for your
That's right.
individual decision, right? Or
That's right.
individual needs. And so our thesis is if the QQQ continues to outperform the S&P 500, which it does after dividends by about 4.5% per year, and it's less diversified. So this is an interesting situation, right? As everybody's like, oh, you need diversification, you need diversification. It's like, do you though?
Do you really?
If you owned, like, if you think about them as companies, if you owned 104 different companies, some of which are incredibly vertically
Yeah.
integrated, do you think you need more diversification than 104 companies?
Absolutely not. And what I like about your strategy, Chris, is there's a good argument about diversification going back and forth, right? Warren Buffett and I tend to agree with this overall analysis is concentrated bets guard the basket and put all
Yep.
your eggs in that basket and guard the basket because you're
Watch it
so
carefully.
focused.
Yep.
And again, this is the difference between why I think real estate is generally really good for a lot of people as an investment because they don't have the temperament that you do.
Yeah.
They can't hand the emotional the swings. So either they get aligned with someone like you in your profession that is doing it, and then they say, well, I'm just gonna tune out and let Chris take care of it on a day in day out basis. Or and that's why I love the commercial real estate investment because it's just a lot less volatile from a behavioral standpoint. You don't have to deal with the emotional yo-yo generally. Now, the pain train is coming in real estate pretty soon, so there's going to be some emotions and there's going to be some tears. I'm afraid to say,
Yeah.
but generally,
So talking about the stock market being liquid,
yeah,
right, is it tends to lead the real estate market. And like people that are in real estate, if they just paid attention to the stock market, they'd be able to forecast what's going to happen in real estate
mm,
a little bit more. But people that are in real estate tend to be that deep canyon of knowledge, which is good. Like, don't, I'm not trying to discount that,
right.
but it is handy every once in a while to pick your head up, look at the horizon, look at other things that are out there. And so,
Well, Chris, and thank you for mentioning this. One of the motivations behind my podcast is trying to broaden the viewpoint in the commercial real estate space to you know the the worst punch you get is the one you didn't see coming. So again, trying to arm people from a risk management standpoint of okay, let's talk about this. And again, I for doggone sure don't know that I have the answers, but we're asking the right questions, hopefully at least. And so we're starting to think in terms of risk management and what we can do. And that's a great point of where if you look at some of the signals that are being sent, it's like okay, you can start to pick up. It may not be, hey, this is my trade signal. If I see this happening, I'm definitely out. But it can give you some hints that okay, we need to start paying attention because something in the weeds is not good. And you can see the snake wrestling in the grass with some of these signals for sure.
And, people that have lots of cash on hand can weather this storm. It's the people that are over leveraged and undercapitalized are going to see more pain than they see coming, I think.
I completely agree, and that we're basically counting on it. I'll just leave
Yeah.
it at that. I can't necessarily get into weeds about what I
Yeah.
mean by that, but
I can read between the lines. And that's, people are like, oh, the stock market's going to fall further. And I'm like, I hope it does, to be honest. I hope it does.
I don't want to root against anyone.
Yeah. But for my strategy, the dollar cost averaging is more beneficial if the stock market falls further. If it doesn't fall further, then I have to pay higher prices, right? Even if
Right.
it like goes up by 10% and falls by 5, I'm still, paying 5% more than I would be today.
Okay. And Chris, I feel like you've been so generous with your time. I don't want to. We probably could do this for 8 hours. I have a feeling
Yeah. Yeah.
we can geek out enough for this to take it a full 8 hour romp into the
Yeah.
risk management space. Um, Chris, ultimately, is there any question that I didn't ask you that I should have, or that one final area that man I wish you would have talked about X? Is there anything that you would like to add?
I would encourage people just to, even if you don't understand stock options, you don't understand stocks, I can explain it to you. I've taught people how to simulated trade. I just encourage people to take control of their finances
Mm,
and have them at your fingertips because, being out of control, and that's where I was with the real estate situation, right? I was not in control of that. And I want to empower people. I want to empower people to have a strategy where they can control their emotions, and that's, my job as a fund manager. Yeah, the trading is part of it. I get that, but my main job is to control my partner's emotions,
Right.
help them help themselves, because everybody wants to sell when the market's down. And you can buy low and sell high an infinite amount of times. So let's just get paid to do that
Yeah.
instead of buying high and selling low. This is a terrible plan. You can only do this so many times.
Right.
So I teach people how to simulate trade our strategy. I'm completely transparent about our strategy. And Dylan actually doesn't love that about me. But I'm like, if we empower people
Yeah.
to understand what we're doing, if they have enough money to do our strategy is capital intensive because we don't use any leverage. If they
Mhm.
have enough money to trade our strategy on their own, I empower them to do that. That's fantastic.
Good on you. Yep.
It's about relationships, right? And if they feel that they can call me and confide in me about what's going on in their financial life, and I can teach them something, some tools that are going to be advantageous to them, then I'm happy to do that. And he's like, what if somebody steals it? I'm like, that's fine. But just to wrap up with abundance asset management, we design the stock options strategy specifically to outperform a buy and hold strategy. And I believe, and I'm not 100% on this, but I believe that we are the only single stock, no leverage fund out there.
Wow.
Single ETF. And so what this does is gives our investors a very easily measurable key performance indicator.
Hmm.
Would I be better off to invest in the stock, or would I be better off to invest in abundance? And that's our value proposition: is investors are better off with us than they are in a buy and hold situation. And what this does is opens the door for future single stock funds. And that's what I believe the future in the hedge fund space is single stock funds, where somebody wants to invest in Apple, they love Apple or they love Google or whatever the company is, they're actually better off to invest in our strategy than they are to go out and buy the stock themselves.
That's incredible, Chris. And if they want to know more about this and follow up with you, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook. Abundance Asset Management has a LinkedIn page and a private group as well. We will be broadcasting trades once we get to a certain stage in our fund. We'll be broadcasting trades so people can see how transparent we are.
I look forward to checking that out. Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing your incredible entrepreneurial journey and the journey into the fund manager space. That's a very interesting arc, and I hope that folks can learn something from your story. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how this transpired moving forward for you.
Yeah, for sure. Unfortunately, I have too many cautionary tales for people. So,
Yeah, if hopefully we can learn something from the process and share that, okay, it's not all unicorns. And again, big thing, not
yeah.
all unicorns, not all rainbows, diamonds, yellow stars, or whatever. There are bad things that can happen and do.
Just
So
one last thing here. You
certainly.
talk about your grandmother. My grandfather, actually, I was really close with him. He passed away, but he was awesome. And I learned a lot of lessons the hard way as a kid, right? And so grandfather imparted me some wisdom, and I want to pass it on. I like generational wisdom. And
Sure.
he's like, Chris, you've really got to start learning from other people's mistakes, because you'll never live long enough to make them all yourself.
Mic drop.